Good morning. Hemshech Ayin Beis, volume 2. We are on page 1191, Aleph Kuf Tzadik Aleph. Because we're entering into, we shall say, dense and complex territory here, let me just give a good overview, hopefully, to help put things into context and to keep our eyes on the ball of what exactly the Rebbe Rashab is coming to explain. Because a lot is going on here, and when you look back at the earlier Maimorim, both the ones I have referred to yesterday, and including volume 1, especially in the beginning, a lot of this has been discussed, but more at length. So it's vital to really be able to pull it all together. So let me just say the following. The immediate theme of the last few hundred pages has been the transformation of the tzimtzum. What he keeps referring to here, the hipuch hatzimtzum, transforming the concealment and revealing how the tzimtzum is really ultimately a divine force, and revealing that which lies behind the tzimtzum. In other words, the tzimtzum was not meant to be a concealment as an end in itself. It was b'shvil hagili. When the teacher conceals his brilliance in order to teach to a student, yes, on one hand, a concealment compared to what the teacher is on his own, but the whole purpose of it is in order to reveal. Furthermore, even the oyir, before the tzimtzum, Erein Sof, before the tzimtzum, was also made ultimately. God didn't need Erein Sof. It's ultimately to radiate and shine and illuminate after the tzimtzum. So, but you have to begin somewhere. So first you have to conceal the divine presence, like he put it here, the infinite divine presence, the bligvul, in order to leave space for another. But then you need to stream consciousness to the other. And that's the narrow flow of the kav, the pnimi. And there too, you need a tzimtzum in order to tailor it to the student. So if you think of a beginner student, just a child learning Aleph Beis, what do they know in an Aleph? What's an Aleph? The letter Aleph, the ABC, what is it compared to the teacher's intelligence? It's minuscule. And if you talk about the infinite divine, which is even beyond Aleph Beis altogether and beyond intelligence and beyond structure altogether, it's completely so far, this is completely infinitely distant. And yet you have to begin somewhere. So the Eibishter created a system where you have now, no matter what level you're at, even if you're a complete beginner, a yesh hanivra, a person who's not even aware of anything but themselves. But you have, it's not airtight because there's an in there somewhere. There's a divine energy that's concealed within you, within existence. And the process begins by you beginning to recognize it. Recognizing could be just learning an aleph. Recognizing could be making a bracha on a piece of food, a blessing. Recognizing could be to be generous and kind and give a little tzedakah on a very simple level. And all of life is a journey to expand your containers and your consciousness and your awareness to be able to absorb and assimilate higher levels of elikus, of the divine, and the purpose of your life. Where a person stands, I'm not discussing right now. Everybody's got their level of avodah. And there's also shifts and changes, ups and downs. But that's the process. Now, where do you end up? End up is Mashiach, La'asad Lavi, the future. Whereas he said in the last page, will be Elikus B'Pshitis. The Erein Sof before the tzimtzum will radiate in existence without destroying existence. That would not have been possible in the beginning, because in the beginning, if you had revealed all that, that child that's learning Aleph would never come to be. Nothing could exist in the presence of the infinite divine. But the beauty here is, because it's all coming from the divine, from the source, so even the pnimi in the smallest level is also a divine energy. And you're coming to understand Havayu Elikim, even though it's Havaya Delatato, it's a lower level. But it's still at the end, we're going to learn there's only one God. All these tracks, as different as they may be, bli gvul, gvul, and they are different because from our perspective, they're very different. But at the end of the day, at some point, they do converge in the source. But we are not there. So from the point of view of Atzmus, as we're going to learn, is beyond gvul and bli gvul. We learned earlier, that's why a lower world can become is similar to the higher world. Because Atzilus and Biyah are equal compared to that which is higher than Atzilus and Biyah. But that's from God's point of view. We also learned in the previous Maimon, that's why Rabbi Yehuda says, after Rabbi Yitzchak, Rabbi Yehuda, what does he say? That Bubara Adam al Kula, that's why you need an Adam. Because you need a human being who's going to introduce that dimension of the divine. But you can't come to an equalization of everything before you come to first recognize that there's a God altogether. So you have to climb step by step, as we made very clear, we learned it, that if you don't go step by step, you deceive yourself and you ultimately can even be destructive because you're not in reality. So you have to go step by step as you absorb and assimilate more. But in this process now, because we need to internalize it, that's why it's critical to explain the distinctions between the Ir HaGvul and the Ir HaBli Gvul. We can't just jump and say Atzmus is beyond both, and we're there. We're not there. As I said, we barely can assimilate Elikus in Gvul, let alone Bli Gvul. So that's why it's critical in the discussion to understand all the different steps, because every step has its quality. I've explained a number of times, for example, why do we have Avos Hashem and Yiras Hashem? What's wrong with just loving God? Why do you also have to be in awe of God? Or why not just awe of God without love of God? So one very basic explanation is because love is intimate. It's closeness. And awe is distance. Not distance in a negative way. Distance as recognizing that God is not you. So if you only have Ava, let's say in a relationship, husband and wife, there's only love, and there's no respect, there won't be boundaries. Love conquers all, but it's not correct. People need their space. People have distinctions and diversity. A true relationship is a combination of respect and love. The love is the closeness that we identify with the thing we love, and we're close to it, we relate to it. Yira is more respecting. I don't relate to it necessarily, but I respect it. As a matter of fact, I'm in awe of it because it's beyond me. So in different language, to know that God is close to you is critical. That God, that you're created in the divine image. God is providing for you. He's giving you livelihood, health, family, blessings. It's a personal relationship. But is God only that? No. That's Mamalakam. That's a Primi relationship. A Makif relationship, a Bli Gvul is recognizing that God is beyond being my partner, my close beloved. Like we say, Em Kabonim, Em Kavodim. We are like a son, a child to God, but we also like a servant. You need both. The child part is the closeness, and the servant part is recognizing that God is beyond us, which creates a level of awe, and the relationship is not just on your terms, it's also on God's terms. So in the context of the interface, which is the theme of all of Ayin Beis, the interface, theme of all of Chassidus and Kabbalah and Torah for that matter, you need both dimensions. You need to know there's an Ir HaGvul which you relate to, and you need to know there's an Ir HaBli Gvul which is beyond you. That makes you related when you know it's beyond you, because you want to also know God on God's terms, not just on your terms. So that's right, it elicits a different type of reaction. In volume 1, he said, the Ir HaBli Gvul elicits bittul. The Ir HaGvul elicits creation. In other words, the Ir HaGvul is there to create us. The Ir HaBli Gvul is there to show us that we are nullified in the presence of something far greater and higher. But you can't begin with a nullification if you don't begin first. First, you need to exist. First, you need a yesh before you have bittul hayesh. And then you can climb to bittul b'mitzias, yichud tata, yichud elah, das tachten, das elyon, the different terms he used. The ayin of the yesh hanivra, the ayin of the yesh amiti. Now, next point. Next point is that when you talk before the tzimtzum, in general, you're not talking about our terms. That's God's terms. It's not atzmus, because that's beyond terms altogether. And it's beyond any levels of consciousness. But bifnei tzimtzum is mitzias nimtza. It's an existential state. It's an existence, but it's completely divine consciousness. There is no room for anything else. We learned from Medrash that before the creation, meaning pre-tzimtzum, there's only him and his name. What is Shmai? Oyer Ein Sof. What is Oyer Ein Sof? All it is divine aware consciousness. Within that divine consciousness arises, so to speak, and a desire to create existence. So we learn, therefore, that in the Oyer Ein Sof Tzimtzum, there's so-called two stages. But it's also, it's stages that you cannot recognize, because from the point of view of divine, they're all part of one divine consciousness, one bligvul, if you wish. One is the divine as it is to itself, and the other as the divine begins to relate to and get stimulated to create existence. Like we learned, especially in Tzadik Daled, if you may recall, there's a state that's before Kedem Alei Saratzen. There's no desire at all. And again, before I mean conceptually, not in time. Then you have a state where there's a consideration, a heskim. It's considering building existence. Then there's a shakavitaria, a type of deliberation. Then there's a hachlota, a determination. And then it's still not, it's like someone saying, you know what, okay, I'm going to build a home. But it could take years till you build this home. Then comes the state of the Ratzon Klali. This is the first. The Ratzon Prati, where now you're beginning to envision what type of home. And even that continues further. Before you envision, you begin to be drawn and you actually want it. It's not just conceptually that you think about a home, you're actually now going to activate it. And then comes stage 3, you envision it, which is the 10 hidden spheres. All this, Lifnei Tzimtzum, is one seamless force. But when you break it down, the Eibishter telling us, if you want to relate to me, I relate to you as well. That the part of the Oyer Pnimi that will ultimately permeate existence is rooted in when I'm envisioning you. The part of Oyer Makif or Oyer Bligvul, which is beyond existence, is the part where it's not yet shaped or defined that there's going to be an existence. And you can connect to both. And that's why I give you, after the Tzimtzum, both experiences, the Oyer HaGvul and the Oyer HaBligvul. So when a person, for example, on a regular day, recognizes that God is blessing him in his livelihood, in his health, it's a recognition of the Oyer HaGvul within you, the divine that is sustaining you. When you suddenly recognize, let's say a miracle happens in your life, or something that's awesome, that blows you away, you're experiencing a divine bligvul that's beyond your structure. And it's lifting you up to a place of recognition. Oh, wow. It's like a wow moment. And you want both, and you want to join them all together. And all this is included in the verse, V'yadaita hayem. This is what you should know. Every day of your life, every moment of your life, you should be aware. Yediyah. V'ashavesa levavecha. Take it to heart. Internalize it feeling-wise. You should feel it. That what? Havayu elikim. That the elikim, where there's the elikim in the lowest levels of the tzimtzum, that impacts the Oyer HaGvul, or elikim in the higher level, that impacts the Oyer HaBligvul, the second impact of the tzimtzum, or the first one, that conceals the infinite divine light. That it's all havayu elikim. Recognize the havayu within it. And b'shamayim emav, Oretz Mitachas is telling you where. Oretz Mitachas is havayu elikim, as the divine is within existence. Shamayim emav is havayu elikim, as the divine is higher than existence, also affected by elikim. The two impacts of the tzimtzum we learned. And you're retracing the steps, and you, through your v'yadaita, you're changing reality. You're taking the concealment and seeing through it and transforming it through birurim on the lower level, the clarifications, the separations, and on the higher level, the awareness of Das Elyon, which is also going from the bottom up, where you come to realize that the divine is beyond existence. So now, there's a lot more to be said about all of this, but suffice it to say for now that we're now discussing, so what are the qualities of each We know the Eir HaGvul speaks to us. It relates to us. But what about the Eir HaBli? What is it teaching us that the Eir HaGvul does not teach us? That's what we're right now in the middle of. And based on what I just, the overview, I think it will help us understand both what we're learning and what we're going to be learning, which is going to be a little dense, but with this context, I think it will help a lot in understanding the whole picture. So it all comes down to, where are you? You could be in a very low level and still experiencing these levels. Or you can talk about very high levels. Ultimately, the goal is the joining of pre-symptom and post-symptom. But that doesn't happen overnight. That takes work, a lot of work. So good news is we have thousands of years behind us of hard work that our ancestors and our generations before us did. So we're not coming in a vacuum. When the Rebbe says the world is ready for Gula, he's saying because we've gone through so much. We've worked so hard on the Eir HaGvul and the Eir HaBli in the generations past. We have the last job to do is to finish the last step and then cross the threshold. But ultimately, it's going to be joining of a pre-symptom consciousness in a post-symptom reality. So existence remains existence, but now it's a very different existence because it is fully saturated. It's like the child is no learning, just learning Aleph Beis. The child is now learning it all because he's grown or she's grown. The Kalim have expanded. We now can appreciate and assimilate and absorb higher and higher levels. And again, each of us in our own way, commensurate, proportionate to our state of being. Okay. So now I'll sum up what we're learning right now, where we are right now. Just 1 second. I want to say one more thing before I continue here, just to round out the whole picture. Keep in mind there are really three things that are important to always keep in mind of. There's Eir HaBli, that is essentially divine energy on God's terms. Like in the context of our conversations here, the Ayin of the Yesh Amiti. The Eir HaGvul is the divine energy as it relates to existence. But then there's existence itself, what we call the Yesh. Or, in other words, the Kalim on a higher level. So you have Eir HaGvul, and Kalim. Because remember, Eir HaGvul is still divine energy. It's like in a soul inside of a body, but it's the soul, it's not the body. So the body, where do the Kalim come from? This is what Chassidus calls Koyach HaGvul. If you go back to volume 1, he makes it very clear. There's Eir HaGvul and Koyach HaGvul are not the same thing. The Koyach HaGvul is the creation of existence itself, whether it's Chochma Vatzilus or ultimately all the way down to Chochma Vasiyah and even in a physical Yesh. The only thing I would qualify is when it gets to a physical Yesh, there you need the Koyach HaAtzmus because you need the Yesh HaNivra to feel Ein Le'ila V'Siba, does not feel it has a cause. That comes from Atzmus. Kalim of Atzilus do not feel they have no cause. They know they're Kalim of Atzilus, but they're still substance. So in the analogy I use with the artist, the Eir HaBli of the artist is how the artist is beyond being an artist and beyond the art that he's creating right now. But it's part of who he is. It's the artist in his fullest sense of the word, even beyond being artist and beyond the art. The Eir HaGvul is the artist as he relates to his art. 10 spheres. This is the piece of art, but it's the artist within the art. What about the art itself? What about the paint, the colors, the shapes, the images, the canvas? Where did that come from? How does that fit in here? That's the Koyach HaGvul. That's the Koyach HaGvul of Ein Sof that creates the Kalim, which the artist then paints his image that he wants to paint, which carries also the Bli Gvul that's beyond everything. In the language of Chassidus, Kalim are rooted in the Rishimu. Rishimu, it means literally trace. A Rishima. Like, well, let's say when you write something on a blackboard, and then you erase it, a trace remains. A different word I used was echo. Even though Rishima is not an echo, it means a trace. like residue. It's like sometimes, you paint, let's say you make letters on a beach, and then the water washes over the letters. Even when the water goes back, you can still maybe see a trace. Now, the Rishimu is a state of concealed state. But what is it concealing? It's concealing the Koyach HaGvul that originated Lifnei Tzimtzum, where there it would have been the root of the containers, but it's not containers yet. It's called Koyach HaGvul, the power to create containers. That power translates into the Rishimu that remains after the Tzimtzum. When you silence and you conceal the infinite energy and the finite energy, you have room now for a canvas. This is called the Tzimtzum Chol L'Makom Panei. So the canvas is an empty slate. It's like an empty hole, but in it lies the potential for the containers that will emerge. When a person now comes when the artist comes with the paintbrush, which is the kav, and he starts with the divine finite energy, which is informed by and originates in the higher levels of energy, which I'll talk about in a moment, and now uses the paint and everything, which is the Rishimu comes alive, then ultimately will become the containers that will contain the divine finite energy. So the Rishimu impacts, of course, the energy, and the energy impacts the Rishimu, because the energy brings it alive, and the Rishimu defines that the energy should be impacted, what he called here a state of hisalmus and concealment and hislapshus. Now it's interesting. Let me give an example with soul and body. We know that the body is not created by the soul, right? Because even when the soul leaves the body, this body remains intact. It takes a while till it decomposes, God forbid. So the neshama doesn't create the body, but it energizes the body. So at the moment of conception, when the father's seed fertilizes the mother's egg, okay, the ovary, and God blesses it now, the third partner blesses it with a neshama. We know that a seed can fertilize an egg and it won't necessarily conceive. You need three partners. The third partner, Hashem, provides the soul. Without the soul, you will not have an animate conception. It will not take hold. So now you have the conception, the father and mother provide the keli. They're like the Rishimu. The neshama activates it and makes it come alive. And with the neshama, which like is the kav, the eragvul, it makes the body begin to develop, called the fetus developing. Take away the neshama, the fetus will not develop. Take away the fetus, you'll only have a neshama, you won't have a guf. So the guf has its own root. The neshama has its own root, but they come together and they both need each other. One energizes and brings alive the other one gives it shape and form, which ends up being the keli. That's why in Pasuk Eliyahu we say every Friday from Tikkun Zeyar, Ishtare kegufa b'lei nishmasa, that when the air is stalik, when you take away the energy of the spheres, you have geguf b'lei nishmasa. The kelim remain like a body without a soul. So they're like letters, but without a message. So therefore, there you have all of that, and it's all rooted before the tzimtzum. Now, one more point I want to make, which may come up, but this is vital in Ayin Beis. How does the Eira Gvul and Eira Bli Gvul speak to each other? So here's what he says in Ayin Beis, especially in volume 1 in the beginning. Because on one hand, there are two different tracks. One is always going to remain transcendent. Eir Hasevav Kalamin, Makif, Igulim. The other is going to be an Eir Pnimi that's going to enter and be imminent, Pnimius. They're very different types of energy. On the other hand, Lifnei Tzimtzum, there's a point where they both come from the same place. Two tracks. So to make the unity between Gvul and Bli Gvul, Eira Gvul and Eira Bli Gvul deeper, there's different ways Chassidus explains it. Sometimes it speaks about two tracks, but in Ayin Beis he says that the Eira Gvul, in its original source, was really the Eira Bli Gvul. It's the artist who's beyond being an artist and has infinite possibilities, and he envisioned one called the Eir HaGvul, the Esespheres Agnuzis, which will also come, the Koyach HaGvul will give it the shape that it needs later. So there's also that before the Tzimtzum, the Koyach HaGvul. But we're talking about Eir now, as a Gilui. The Gilui, the Eir HaGvul really is a piece of the Eir HaBli Gvul. But this piece, once the tzimtzum takes place, is going to conceal the er habligvul, so you'll only see this piece of art. But within it lies embedded all the possibilities as well, because Havaya Lakim is also on that level. He's not speaking about that here. Here he's speaking about them as two different things, but earlier in Ayin Beis, he made it very clear. So what do you have now? The kav, therefore, which is the oir hapnimi after the tzimtzum, is affected by the tzimtzum and the reshimu, as we said. So it's defined, but it's rooted in the oir hagvul that God envisioned the spheres before the tzimtzum. And the oir hagvul has within it some impact from the oir habligvul. And that's why he said that the kav is both Gilead Helam and Yeshma Ayin. On one hand, it's Gilead Helam because the kav is revealing the way God is envisioning existence, the root of the Ur Pnimi. But it's Yeshma Ayin compared to the Ur Habligvul because it's a leap. The infinite is infinite. It's infinite possibilities. And yet something remains in the finite energy from the infinite energy. But that I'd rather reserve for discussion later because it's not really the theme right here, but it's also relevant to the whole picture here. Now, just for the record, when we speak via Daita Yem, I said b'shamayim mimal v'al oretz mitachas, he's saying b'shamayim mimal is the Ur habligvul, oretz mitachas is the Ur hagvul. As we will learn, Ein Oid, in the next volume 3, he's going to talk about the Koyach hagvul, how even the Elokim itself, in the Kelim themselves, also come to experience the divine. But right now we're talking about Ur habligvul and Ur hagvul. Okay, that's what I wanted to add. I hope you followed. There's a lot that I unpacked here, and as a lot of it is containing, I'm summarizing literally hundreds, if not the last 1,000 pages in different ways. I didn't refer exactly to each mimer, but that's the general picture of it. So I hope that was helpful. Okay. Now, with that said, I mean, I'm happy to answer any questions if anybody has, or we go right, I'll take from there and I'll now apply this to what we're learning right now in the context of the Ur habligvul and the Ur hagvul.
Basically, you said that the Ur hagvul and the Ur habligvul, it's the same one thing, but it's being expressed in different ways. Sometimes one
Not
of
exactly what I said, but okay.
Because you ask how is the Ur hagvul talking to Ur habligvul.
Yeah, so I said, so he said in volume 1, if you remember, konof, min konof. So the Ur hagvul is min konof, but not the konof. It's like the tzitzis. They are the same person, they come from the same personality, the same material, but they have to be separate. So there's two sides to the Ur hagvul. There's a part that it's like a so-called one possibility among the infinite possibilities, but then there's a part that is separate. So it should be able to become an energy that will enter into each particular detail of existence. So there's really two sides to it.
Yeah, two sides, but they are both belonging to one entity.
That's not what I wanted to focus on, because right now we're actually going to learn not like that, as I said. Now we're learning how the Ur habligvul has something that the Ur hagvul does not have. So that's why I'm pushing back. There are parts that it does absorb something, but now we're talking about the distinction in this mimer where we're learning now. Okay, so I'm going to explain now where we are. So what do we learn from the bottom of page 1190? After explaining the Yichud Havaya Lakim ala Oretz Mitachas, which means the Ur hagvul, which is the air that radiates in existence through Birurim, and we reveal that like Bitla Yesh, as I explained. He comes to B'Shamayim Mimal, and he says this is referring to the first impact of the Tzimtzum on the Ein Sof HaBligvul, where it conceals it in a way that we should not feel Elokuz B'Pshitus and Elam is B'Schachus, like he said. That before the Tzimtzum, the Ein Sof was dominant, that the only reality was the divine. Even the Ur hagvul that was before the Tzimtzum only recognized the divine. It wasn't yet, there's no painting, there's no art, there's nothing. It's the infinite divine is starting to envision. But up there, everything is Elokuz B'Pshitus. And the world is not yet a reality. It's a novelty. like he said. What did the tzimtzum do? It concealed that infinite energy and now allows for the space of existence to emerge, and that the energy that will enter into that existence should also be channeled and the tzimtzum impacting. But now we're talking, however, the tzimtzum, the big tzimtzum, the larger impact of the tzimtzum, I don't want to say the larger impact. The first impact is to conceal the infinite divine. And now, b'shamayim v'yedaita ayin v'shaves levecha k'havai elikim b'shamayim mimal is revealing the infinite divine that was concealed by the tzimtzum. That's what we're addressing now. Not the finite energy, but the infinite energy. And now, what does this add in the whole picture? What does this teach us? And in this part of the transformation of the tzimtzum that the Eir HaGvul does not have, that's what he says. Well, before that he said that. So that's the Gili of Shem Havaya. Shem Havaya hu Elikim, Havaya de La'ela. What is the Yisren? So he said, V'yesh Yisren b'Gili Ezeh shu b'chinas ha'Eir HaGvul. There's an advantage. There's a quality that is contributed, introduced through this Gilui. And he says, as I mentioned, three things. It's overall two things, but he breaks it down in the parentheses. I'm going to just sum it up. I'm not going to learn all of it inside again. The first thing, so the first thing is that the Eir Pnimi is not kamoy ha'atzmus. It's not the full expansiveness of atzmus. It's specifically focused toward one thing, creating this art, radiating and illuminating these worlds. On the other hand, it's revealing atzmus without any limits. Additionally comes the second thing. Obviously, they're all interconnected. The Eir Primi, he's now focusing on that it comes in a measure. Not only is it relating to existence, which even if the Eir Primi was not measured, but the mere fact that it's relating to existence is not like the Eir HaGvul, which relates to Atzmos, to the source. In other words, the Eir HaGvul is looking downward, and the Eir HaGvul is looking upward to the source. The Eir HaGvul is looking downward to existence. But the Eir itself is Midah v'Gvul. It's measured and has parameters and limits. Midah v'Gvul. Lifi Eifana Elimus. So the Eir itself has now been shaped to be fitting and commensurate with the worlds that it's going to energize, create and energize. And then he says even furthermore, not only when it's concealed, Gam kashemeira Eir, kamoishu l'mayla mislapsus v'salmus. Even when through Avodah Zabirurim, like he said in the previous paragraph, and the Eir is radiating, and you see it, and what's radiating is higher than the being enclosed and concealed in existence, nevertheless, even at its best, the Eir is still a measured Eir. Like I mentioned in the Ovis. Before the Ovis, the sins of the people concealed the divine. But even with the Ovis, and they revealed everything, nevertheless, it was still the Eir HaGvul, Keil Shaddai. That the Eibishter says, Shmi Havaya Leine Daiti Lehem. It's still Keil Shaddai, Dai. Shaddai from the word Dai. It's a limited divine energy. It's revealed. That's the quality. But it's still defined. It's the energy of existence, not the energy beyond existence, not the Bligvul. That is point number 2. Now, the parentheses, the Rebbe Rashab adds even another dimension. We just said that even when it's higher than Hisalmus, higher than concealment, it's still a defined energy. It's the energy of Chachma, of Bina, the 10 spheres of the art. It's still the divine energy in the art, not the divine energy beyond the art. But now he says something further. After the Tzimtzum, even everything, even the revealed divine energy has been impacted by the Tzimtzum. So you still use the word Hisalmus. So now he's using Hisalmus in 2 ways. One is that when you reveal it, it's beyond the concealment, meaning it's not concealed as it was before the Avodah. But even what you reveal is still subject to the helm of the tzimtzum. That's what he says. Because even in its root, the pnimi after the tzimtzum came through hislapsus, through the reshimu, through the tzimtzum and the reshimu. B'nekudus reshimu, like I said before, that trace, that root of the containers has already impacted the kav. So no matter what happens afterwards, whether it's concealed, even if it's revealed, it still has the impact of the tzimtzum on it. Im came. Also that which becomes literally revealed. In other words, revealed compared to Atzilus, it's revealed compared to Atzilus. And also, even higher than Atzilus, it's not like the Eir before the Tzimtzum, even the Eir Pnimi before the Tzimtzum, the root of it rather, because it's been affected by the Tzimtzum. That's in addition to it also being Midah v'Gvul. So now we see here, there's three things that the Eir HaGvul, so-called, is lacking. Number one, it's directed toward existence and it's not Kamaya Atzmus. It's not a reflection of Atzmus in its entirety. Number two, it's measured and defined, even when it's revealed. And number three, even if its full revelation is still impacted by the Tzimtzum's concealment or the Rishimu's concealment, either way. That's what he says now. He goes back to point two. Achlavad zeis. Now, however, besides this, that it's been affected by the Hisalmus, he goes back to point two. The Eir itself is measured, has a measure and a parameter. Because this energy is what was measured for the need of the world. In other words, it's not just a paintbrush that's flowing endlessly. It's exactly measured toward the exact image and structure of existence that God wants to create. So what does this tell us? That the Eir itself is not just directed toward the world, it itself is be'etzim, is fundamentally a measured and defined and limited energy. Because you could have a measure, as I said, that's not Akbala. You could have something infinite that's measuring, but it itself remains beyond. Here he says the Medida Gufa, the measuring itself is in a state of definition. We learned this also earlier. So basically the Eir is fundamentally structured now. Mashenkin Eir and Self-Abligvul, now he goes out of the parentheses, he's going back to the main points again, where the two things, Kamaya Atzmus, Loi Kamaya Atzmus, and Midah v'Gvul, but the Eir and Self-Abligvul, how do you believe Midah v'Shir? He's not talking about Hisalmus now, concealment. We'll talk about that a little later. In contrast, it doesn't have a measure. The infinite divine light does not have any measures. Not only is it reflective of Atzmus and not relating to existence, it doesn't have any measure in it. V'hainu, which means the Etzem Ha'er hu Eir sheb'chinas bilti midah. The Etzem Ha'er, the fundamental energy, is one that is not defined by parameters, bilti midah. It's without measure, without structure, without parameter. This is where we stopped. Okay. So I'm glad I went over it because you see more detail once you review it more in depth. So now he continues. V'yesh yisrein l'gili zeh, and there's a advantage of this revelation, bli midah, without measure, without parameter, gam legabi gili pnimius ha'er. Also, in comparison to the revelation of pnimius ha'er, b'chinas pnimius hakav. So now he's going back. If you remember, there was chitzenius hakav and pnimius hakav. Chitzenius hakav was focused on shaping and defining existence. Pnimius hakav was God's intention in shaping and defining existence. So it's like the artist, when he's actually painting, he has to be very disciplined and paint. That's the outer dimension of the kav. But it's informed by the intention. Why does God want Chachma to be Chachma and Bina, Bina, and Atzilus, and Bria, Bria? That's the Pnimius hakav. We learned this, just to refresh your memory, back. The root of both of them is back a while back in Tiferes Hanelam. Where was it? Okay. Page 1070. So 20 pages ago. Actually, 1069, sorry. 1069, he talked about that 2 levels of Ayin is in the Kav itself. Pnimius hakav and Chitzenius hakav. So now he's saying even more. You could argue that the Eir HaBligvul, which has no measure, is higher than the Chitzenius hakav, than the Eir Pnimi, the outer dimension of the Eir Pnimi, that's focused on the structure of existence. But what about Pnimius hakav? The Pnimius of that, isn't that part of the Eir HaBligvul? Isn't that part of, isn't that also reflecting what Eibishter wants? So he's going to explain that even the Pnimius HaKavona, the inner intention of the Eir HaGvul, which is not the actual definition that the paintbrush, that the Kav creates, but the Pnimius of it is also is lacking something that the Eir HaBligvul introduces. Because you could argue technically, you know what? We don't just want Chitzenius hakav, we want Pnimius hakav. But what do you need Eir HaBligvul? Why do you need something that has no measure altogether? So he's now going to explain that advantage of Eir HaBligvul even on Pnimius hakav. Now, if you don't remember what we learned about Pnimius hakav, this I may need to elaborate more. I'm hoping you do remember, and I'm referring you back to 1169, 1170, where it was discussed a lot more. Actually continues on all the way, I believe, to the end of the Maimer. Yeah. Okay. So now, what is the quality of Bligvul, Eir HaBligvul, over the Pnimius ha'Eir? There's one more thing about Pnimius hakav. Hold on. Yeah, also on top of page 1185, he also spoke about the Pnimius hakav as opposed to the Chitzenius hakav, which is what the Adam introduces them. Okay. So he says like this. Sharigam Eir Zeh, because also this light, this energy, he's talking about the Eir Pnimi, the Pnimius of the Eir Pnimi, the inner dimension of the Eir Pnimi, which is reflecting what the God's desire and inner intention is in creating this defined energy. Sharigam Eir Zeh B'chinas Eir Pnimi, Sheba B'chinas Medida. Even the Pnimius Eir, the Pnimius hakav is also an Eir Pnimi that comes in a measured way. It's just the inner dimension of it, but it still comes in a form of measure. Because we must say, that is a necessity to say, that every immanent energy is in a state of measure. In other words, even when you're talking about the inner dimension of it, which is the kavanah of it, which is a kavanah of godly, the divine intention in it, it's still a divine intention in this measure. So yes, when a person is laying bricks or installing the plumbing or electricity in a home, the electrician may not know what the Pnimius HaKavana is in why he's putting electricity here or plumbing or bricks. His job is to get it done. He doesn't need to know the whole the plan. But the person who's building the house or commissioned the building of the house, or the architect, or the overall seer knows, 1 second, the electricity or the plumbing and the bricklaying is not just a detail. In it lies a whole intention of why I want this, because when I'll have that, I'll be able to have the home that I want to build. The actual workers don't need to know that. Like we spoke about the king, the chief of staff, the heads of the departments, and then each department has its workers. The worker is dealing with this detail, like Chitzenius Hakav. Obviously, it's informed by Pnimius Hakav, especially when you're talking about godliness. But its focus is in shaping and defining the detail. The Pnimius Hakav is the deeper intention in that. So yes, the Pnimius Hakav is informed by the bigger picture, but the bottom line is the Pnimius Hakav also needs to know, it's basically saying, this is why we're creating this detail. So he's saying Pnimi, even in its Pnimius Dika level, is also has measure. However, it's the neshama of the measure, so to speak. It's the inner significance of this measured structure. Eira Bligvul, as we're going to learn soon, doesn't have that at all. It's only the divine. It's only reflects the source without any influence by details at all. But now he's going to still qualify. He's going to ask a question and say, 1 second, isn't this medida from the Pnimius Hakav's level not really a measure? It's a medida atzmis. If Elikus wants to have something defined as Chachma, why is that more limiting than God who wants to be undefined? It's not a definition based on imposition. When we human beings know we can only, let's say, see a mile, or we can only jump up 5 feet, that's a fundamental medida. That's an inherent limitation. By the Elikus, there's no limitations. He only chose to limit himself. He chose to create this defined art. So why is that called a medida? That's going to be the next. It's a preview of what we're going to learn tomorrow. He's going to ask that question now. Isn't it a medida atzmis, which is not an actual medida? So we'll stop here. Top of page 1191. We're middle, obviously, of the subject matter. But he's now going to discuss, what does medida mean? What means to measure something? Is it really measured or not measured? Because if it's all divine, as I just asked, that's what he's going to qualify tomorrow. But right now, what we learned is that every pnimi behechlech, he says, you must say, has an element of measure. And we're going to find out what that measure means in fullest sense. So we'll stop here.